I am Margarita Pintado Burgos. I am a poet and a professor at Point Loma Nazarene University, and this is the Written Scene.
Hello and welcome to The Written Scene. My name is Adam Greenfield. I am the host, and we are talking with writers and creators of all kinds about path and process. Today's guest is someone whose name I have known for years, and we just actually recently finally started talking in person. We hadn't quite had the opportunity yet, I guess, but I've known her name. So, Margarita, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
This is something that when I started this podcast, I created a list of people I wanted to interview. And I've had you on there for a long time, and there's a lot of people in San Diego that I'm going through to get to people. So,
Well, I'm honored. Thank you so much. I'm glad we read together at that event
Oh.
a few weeks ago because that's when you invited me.
right,
So,
the Hafez Day.
yes,
Yeah,
that's
that
right.
was such a cool event too.
Wow, and so moving within the whole context we're right now. So yeah, it was necessary. It was very beautiful.
It was in a way for me hard to figure out how to prepare. And I know people were like, well, ask Hafez, and I thought that was
Yeah.
fun, but I guess I wasn't as familiar with Hafez as most others that were there.
Me neither. Actually, this was a great opportunity for me to be introduced to this amazing poet. I think I've read him before, but it's just, kind of out of context again. So I didn't know much. And I love these sort of events when I get invited to things I really don't know much because it's a great opportunity to learn. And wow, what a wise, amazing, prolific,
And fun.
yeah, and fun and
Yeah.
like forever.
Yeah.
It's just amazing to hear poetry that was written so long ago and feel that you are human,
Yeah.
yes, no, I can connect with this. It's amazing, really.
I think it was Carly Marie Demento who said that modern poets, who we are now, are merely in a very long conversation with poets from the past. And I love the thought of that. Like, this is just
Yeah.
an ongoing conversation
That's
that we're
right.
all having.
Yeah.
And it felt like that at Hafez Day.
Yeah, definitely. We have so many creative writing workshops and which is great, but I think like we should have something like creative reading workshops. You know what I mean? Where
Ooh, yeah.
we're just reading, and I'm a professor and I teach literature. I guess that's what I'm saying. But yeah, just to read and yeah, to get inspired and then keep moving and writing, because I think it's different when you're a writer and you're reading your contemporaries all the time and you find a lot of affirmation, and that's or not, but it's great to get that feedback and see how you're doing. But it's so awesome when you read a poet, a classic, and you find affirmation there also, somehow it's not an
Yeah.
active, it's not a direct feedback, but you find yourself there. Yeah, I think that's really incredible.
It's comforting in a way.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
a warm blanket.
We're not alone, and we have not been alone since
All
the
this time.
beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was teaching a poetry class at the San Diego Writers Inc., and I did some digging into some really early poetry, and it's been around for thousands of
Yeah.
years, and to think that we're still doing it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's still somehow, and this is something I want to get to later on in our conversation, but somehow people are still finding it. People
Yeah.
are still attached to poetry.
Yeah.
I wonder if it could be more people,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe why that isn't.
Yeah.
But I think that it's still there, and we're still writing.
Absolutely. Well, the need for self-expression is there, and if you might not find it through poetry, you might find it through another,
Music or
artistic
whatever.
expression, right?
Yeah.
But it is there, and it's just so vital. And I feel it's so necessary for every person, not only for the people who think of themselves as artists and creators,
Yeah.
to find your own way to express yourself in a creative and artistic way, no matter what your profession
Yeah.
is,
Do you think poetry is a little easier to express yourself than other art might be? Or do you think just because
I
we do poetry, it's easy, or not easy, but that's the path we took?
Yeah, I think it depends on your talent. I have friends who they're musicians, right? But really they are poets. They're composing their own songs.
Mm.
So you don't, when you read them, they don't read as poetry, maybe, but the creative work is there, right?
Yeah.
The need for that self-expression is there. Well, for me, it would be super hard to try to express myself in any other way.
Yeah.
So I'm
You don't
happy
play
I found.
music or art,
I don't
paint or
play,
anything? None of
no,
those?
no, through poetry, through short stories, right? But it's been always through writing
Writing.
or through conversation. And I'm almost thinking that there's an art, right, of conversation. And I think that's why I chose this profession.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why I'm a professor. So those are the two ways I find that it's easy to express myself. Not easy.
Not easy in that sense, but yeah.
But that's the path.
It's easier for us to it's more comfortable, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe more comforting is the better way. I play music, as you can see. I've got the guitars hanging up, not professionally, but for me, and I guess I could draw if I really applied myself, but for me, when I write, it's just like, oh yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
This is what this feels like, how I am supposed to express myself.
Yeah. And it's language, and
Yeah.
language is available to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike music, like I cannot just pick up a guitar and start playing. Like I cannot do that.
Would be nice
but,
though. Right?
yeah, but the musician can pick up or anybody. So I mean, I just love the possibilities that language offers you.
It does.
I'm
yeah.
walking down the street and I'm listening to a conversation between two women, and I find the use of language that they're using really fascinating, and they have a lot of style when they're talking. And I'm like, this is beauty and this is art happening, and people sometimes are not aware of how they have a style. You
Right,
know what I
right.
mean?
Yeah.
They're talking, they're captivating you, they're even rhyming, and they don't even notice. I love to have that ear, just to pay attention to
hear
how
it.
people are
Yeah.
talking. It happens to me when I go to Puerto Rico a lot. People are so creative with language there. Every time I go, I learn new words.
Really?
They
Yeah.
mix a lot of English with Spanish, so it's just constantly changing and evolving. So yeah, I'm just a fan of language.
It's an evolving thing, and I did this project for MIT years ago, and we had a linguistics professor on there, and he was like, to get upset or bothered by language being used in a way that you're not used to doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Because it has always been changing, and
Yeah,
it will
yeah.
continue to change,
Yeah.
And then he said, and this one I still don't know if I can reconcile with it. He said, apostrophes aren't necessary because we have context.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I thought, okay, but come on, like,
We don't have apostrophes in Spanish, and this is something I struggle with my students, because they just they don't understand. It takes them a long time to get into the habit, right? That there's no apostrophes in Spanish. That you
Okay.
have to be more. You have to take the long way. You
Yeah,
have
yeah,
to
yeah.
explain everything. But I love apostrophes in English. I think they're so practical.
they're
just-
useful, aren't
yeah,
they?
yeah, absolutely.
So it was weird to hear that, but I agree. I find them very helpful and useful to know. Anyway, that was weird tangent, but
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about some recent stuff you're doing. I know you're teaching. You just said you're teaching poetry and writing at Point Loma,
Yes.
right? I'm curious what you're currently working on writing wise. Do you have anything that you've recently published or that you're currently writing itself?
Yes, I am. So I got an award recently, which is
Congratulations.
thank you, the Ambrosio Prize, given by the Academy of American Poets and the University of Arizona Press. That book is coming out in February
Okay.
now, 2024, and I've been till today. I was working on that and revising the proofs, and it's done, but it's never done.
right.
So we keep revising, and it's my first book that it's bilingual. The prize is the only one in the United States that it's an award for the writer and the translator.
Oh, cool.
So yeah,
Okay.
so it's gonna be my first book bilingual here, published in the U.S. So I'm really excited about that. So right now I'm working on the translation of two other books that were published previously.
Mm-hmm.
A Girl Who Looks Like Me, Una Muchacha Que Se Parece a Mí in Spanish, and Ficción de Venado, The Fiction of the Deer. So I'm working with translations, which is being a very interesting process. I have a translator. She is a Puerto Rican young woman. And it's been really great to go back to revisit my poems
Yeah.
now with an English ear. It's great because you realize sometimes what poems, what are the superior poems, the ones that really are so well conceived that are not presenting so many challenges. So yeah, no, that's been exciting.
What have you found in translating it from Spanish to English? I mean, has that even altered how you write now moving forward?
Yes, it has, but that's not new. I have to say that after I published my first book, Ficción de Venado, that was 2013, and English had made its way in my brain by that moment.
Okay.
But not so much.
Okay.
I would say that my second book and my third book, you can see a difference. And they're written in Spanish, but I'm being bilingual.
Yeah.
And I am influenced not only by the language that now I'm speaking more, but it's also I'm reading more in English because I have to. I am teaching more in English. I'm married to someone who doesn't speak Spanish.
He doesn't speak Spanish.
No,
No?
so
Okay.
so
All right.
so I do 85% of my speaking in English,
Okay.
but I do 90% of my writing in Spanish, and that creates
That's must be
strange,
yeah.
balance and harmony. But it has definitely changed the way I write. I feel that I aim for a more minimalistic way of writing.
Really?
Actually, yeah. Now, it's not on purpose. It's not like I'm thinking this is going to be translated. No, not at all. It's just the way I relate to language change.
Did you find that expressing yourself, you didn't have to work as hard at it, and is that why it's so almost minimal in that way?
No, I think it's just part of a natural evolution. I mean, poets have their own way that they evolve, right?
Mhm, mhm.
I think in my case, my poetry has become more interior, more philosophical,
Okay.
maybe less colloquial.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Yeah. Okay.
Although there's still a lot of mixing of that, the colloquial and maybe deeper, more abstract.
Right.
But I don't know. I became a little more minimalistic, less baroque. Spanish is a language that it takes longer. It's more elaborated.
I'm about a year and a half in, maybe 2 years of learning on
Yeah.
Duolingo, so not really.
Yeah.
But I have noticed that as well. It's like
Yes. We don't have apostrophes.
you don't have apostrophes, right? Yeah, like there's 10 words that says for in
That's
English,
right. That's
and it's
right.
like, okay, I just have to get into that mind frame.
Yeah. And sometimes, to be honest, I think everybody does that in their own language. People hide behind language. And I think the better you are at it and the more confident you feel, you can hide better.
Yeah.
When I started learning English, I felt completely exposed, vulnerable. I didn't have a place to hide. When you're learning a language, that's how you feel. So I don't know, that made me aim for a more kind of clear, precise way of writing.
Almost a quicker way of getting the
Yeah.
idea across.
Yeah. I don't want to hide. That's what I mean. I don't want to hide behind language. Yeah.
Do you worry that you do, or do you?
No,
are you okay with it? If that
I'm
happens?
okay. Maybe what I'm expressing is something I detect when I'm
Oh, okay.
reading my contemporaries.
I see. Okay.
Many of them in Spanish.
Yeah.
So much playing with the language. It's almost like they're wearing a mask. They don't want to show me who they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I just want to remove the mask. That doesn't mean that language is not going to be beautiful and maybe baroque and maybe mysterious. That's not at all. I think what I'm trying to say is that I'm concerned with honesty and sincerity when you're writing. So it felt more like myself to tone it down to yeah. Although I gotta say, now that I did this project of translation, it was a translation of my 3 books. I just made a selection of the poems that I felt had a narrative from the 3 separate books. And I don't think people would be able to say to who was the first, what are the first poems
The
I
earlier
wrote.
one.
You know,
Yeah.
I think I have kept a pretty consistent. I haven't changed that much. My style remains
Yes,
pretty.
you found your voice pretty early then.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's what I. Well, I didn't, but I didn't publish for a long time till I was kind of sure I have found my voice.
Okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I started writing 2006.
Okay.
It really, when I moved from Puerto Rico to Atlanta, to the US, writing in Spanish was a way to keep in touch with that language that I knew it was going to be kind of threatened.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it was a way to remain connected to the literary community back in Puerto Rico. That's why I did it.
As a kid, were you reading and writing a lot?
Yes.
Yeah.
My mother is a Spanish teacher. Then she became an editor.
Oh, wow.
So she's been making books all
Yeah.
her life. My dad was a history professor. So yeah,
Books were everywhere, I
yeah,
assume. Yeah.
my brother is a history teacher. My sister was a Spanish teacher for a while.
Wow,
So it's
yeah.
been in my family. We were not rich. We were not even middle class. We were kind of poor, middle class
This
there.
was in Puerto Rico.
This is in Puerto Rico. But there was a bookshelf in my mother's bedroom,
Okay.
and just one, but it was packed
Yeah.
with the best of Latin American and Puerto Rican history and literature.
Oh, fun.
So yeah, I got a lot of I benefited from I had cultural capital.
Okay.
Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you do to seek out other books? Was that just through school, or did you actually go to?
Yeah, schools. I've always had. I was pretty clear on what I wanted to study, even though
Mhm.
I started on journalism, but I was always really close to whatever writers and poets were.
Yeah.
So I just, I created my own little library from very early. My mom would take me to bookstores just to,
Yeah.
um,
What did you
what
pick out?
I picked out a lot of, I have to say, a lot of Latin American over U.S. literature.
Yeah. Okay.
Just because Spanish was my language, and what we received in Puerto Rico, actually, it's mostly in Spanish in bookstores.
Okay.
So that was the offer. I started reading English when I have to prepare for the GRE. So pretty late,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So since I moved to the U.S., that's when I started to read more.
Branch out a little
Yes,
bit, but I mean
yes.
that would make sense. You were looking for something to, I guess, identify with, right?
Yeah.
To say, oh yeah, I can see myself. in
Yes,
this,
and also we had a. If you grew up in a Spanish-speaking country,
Mhm.
there's a list of like 50 authors
Classics.
that you must know
Right.
and read. So we have our own
yeah,
list.
yeah.
So I knew that I know that really well. That canonical list of readings. Yes.
Okay.
And I did my PhD at Emory University in Spanish. So it was, again, revising that list.
So you came back to it, and it was a list you were already familiar with because you had read it as a kid.
That's right.
Yeah.
I read a lot of things that were not appropriate for my age.
Yeah,
Yes. But
think a lot of
it was
writers do.
great.
That's
Yeah,
why we stick with
absolutely.
writing.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it was noticeable when I mean, I don't mean to sound pretentious, but it was obvious when I got to grad school that I had an advantage
Yeah.
over most of them, especially the kids who are Americans who are doing their PhD in Spanish, which is great. It very, it's an incredible task, but they didn't grow up with this tradition, right? They were
Right.
reading their own.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's I can see the advantage in that. Were you taking creative writing classes while you were learning about, because I know you have a degree in communications as well.
Right.
So were you taking any creative?
Yes. So I started in communications. I was interested in journalism.
Mhm.
Some of my favorite writers were journalists first. So
Oh,
I had
okay.
also this kind of romantic idea, like I can start here and then become a writer.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it wasn't my thing. I did my internship with the most important newspaper in Puerto Rico, and it was just a disaster. I just
no.
didn't like it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just too much. Just following instructions.
It's a different kind of writing
Yes,
too.
absolutely. You don't have a lot of freedom. I think you can gain freedom
Mm-hmm.
with time, but
Mm-hmm.
when you start, you start at the
Just the
bottom,
facts.
and
Yeah.
it's really
Yeah.
it's a little tortuous if
Yeah.
you're a kind of person. That wasn't my thing. At the same time, I was working with a lawyer in a law firm because I was contemplating going to law school. What saved me from becoming a lawyer,
Right. My brother's one. I get it. I
yeah,
get it. Yeah.
is that the great, fabulous Puerto Rican writer Mayra Santos Febres, she was offering creative writing workshop. And for me, this is like 2004, 2005. It was kind of a new thing, the whole thing about creative writing workshop. Uh, Back then, she was already a very important poet and novelist. So I signed up. I took this class at night, and that's where I found myself just too happy. So I quit the lawyer, the law firm.
Yeah.
I decided that I didn't want to work in that paper anymore. And I started my master's in the University of Puerto Rico in literature while I was in that creative writing. That is still my community
Yeah.
of writers.
Yeah.
That one that was created in 2005 in that class.
Do you still talk to him?
Oh yeah,
All
absolutely.
of them,
We
yeah.
do projects together.
I love
We
that.
really we stay together. Yeah, the ones who remain. Yeah,
I keep hearing about these grad school cohorts. That they just
yeah,
they latch on,
Yeah.
and they're like that for not for good, but for a long time.
yeah.
What is it about that? Why do we do that?
I think it's the right conditions, because right now for me my life is just complicated,
Mhm.
but back then I didn't have my own family. I was like, I don't know, 24, 25. So I wasn't a child anymore, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
my passion was in the right place, and I had the maturity to deal with that and the freedom, but not the burden.
Right. Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Of a full-time job, family, and all those commitments. And we were, imagine, it's like you have at least 15 people who are in the same situation.
With the same mindset and everything, all
Yes.
towards the same
Yeah.
similar goals. Yeah.
And the same freedom,
Mhm,
and
yeah.
the same sort of commitment. And we're all adults, but young, So, yeah, it was the right time to do that.
That's pretty cool. That's fun. What are some things that you've learned about writing as you've been teaching it to other people?
Right. And I gotta say, I haven't taught writing at Point Loma. I teach literature.
Literature.
Yeah.
Okay. Has that helped? So has that taught you anything about writing? The literature that you've taught?
Well, and I taught writing actually in my previous job. I was in Arkansas before being in San Diego, and I
Okay.
did teach creative writing there in English. That was a super challenge for me.
Was it? Yeah. Yeah.
Because I write in Spanish mostly. Not now. Now I'm writing in both. But
Mhm.
back then, it helped me a lot, and I think it was great for them actually to have a non-native speaker
Mhm.
giving their feedback.
In Arkansas.
Yeah, in Arkansas. That's where I got my first job, in Arkansas.
I read that, and I have to admit I'm a bit surprised by that.
Yeah.
Like, why Arkansas?
Because I was young, and it was gonna be my first job coming out of grad school. It was a 10-year
Okay.
track position. I was nervous. The clock was ticking.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I accepted that job kind of too fast, and then I received other offers that I didn't take.
Mhm.
But I don't regret it. My time in Arkansas was very special, and I made not many because the culture was so different.
Yeah.
But the friendships I made there are forever.
Yeah.
You know how
Yeah,
that
yeah.
happens? You
Yep,
go to
yep.
these places, and it's full of great people, and you're like, why are you here? It was a cultural shock. More than going to Puerto Rico to Atlanta, going from Atlanta to Arkansas, that was the shock.
Yeah.
That was the
I can't imagine.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. But you know what? This was a tiny town called Arkadelphia. It had
I've heard of it.
yeah, it has like 10,000 people. I had students in my English class that came from towns with 200 people, and they knew all Shakespeare, all of it,
Really?
and they were so good.
Yeah.
Like, I've never encountered students like that, and it's like, how this student in this remote place in the south of the country found their passion. Maybe because there was a lack of so many other things. I
But
don't
they
know
had
why.
to find it.
But really, I met really great students there. I don't want to romanticize that my stay in Arkansas. It was really hard, and we got depressed at some point, and that's
Mhm.
why we got out of there.
Yeah.
But I don't want to forget the good
The good
things.
things, yeah.
Yeah. And being in nature there, my second book, it's pretty much all about Arkansas. There's poems about Walmart, about the lake, the life
Uh-huh.
there.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It's a different life.
It's a different life.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, you mentioned that you've collaborated with people before on books. What kind of challenges and lessons can that bring to a writer?
Well, my collaboration really, it's been with the translation. Other things, I'm part of anthologies and stuff like that, but it's not, I don't collaborate with
Right.
anyone. I just send my stuff, my work.
Mm-hmm.
With the translation, the translator's name is Alejandra. She is 22, I believe. She is 20 years younger than me.
Mm-hmm.
It was a challenge.
I think I remember that age.
Yeah,
It's a long time for me
yeah,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was a challenge at times, a beautiful challenge. Because I feel, language changes from
Mhm.
generation to generation,
Yeah.
and the way you read a poem changes, and your vocab choices change. So it was interesting talking to Alejandra, seeing how she would translate a poem, how I would translate it. Then we would compare. And then my husband, who is a native speaker and also who knows a lot Greek and Latin and Spanish, he doesn't speak it, but he knows
He knows
Spanish.
it. Yeah.
He would read both poems and then give his opinion. It was just,
Oh, that's cool.
if you're trying to do it well, you can, it's like a forever task,
Yeah,
trying
yeah.
to get it right. But it was wonderful because we just kept all the lines of communications open at all times. And we were amazed at each other's choices. And then we would find happy, like a compromise.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like compromise. It was just like, yeah, we would both agree. This is the right option. This is the, yeah.
It's good to have that open line of communication when collaborating,
Yeah.
especially, and also the willingness to say, okay, no, I think I see what you're saying. Let's go with that.
Yes, that's right. I have a project, a website that's devoted to poetry, Distropica, and I collaborate with two poets there. So that's something I do in collaboration. And yeah, we had it was a hard time at first. It was hard dividing the task,
Right,
finding our style. It's been 2 years and a half, I think, and now it's very smooth. So yeah, I think you just gotta find the right people, of course, who you're gonna collaborate with,
Mm-hmm.
and stick to it.
Stick to it.
Yeah.
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 Would you believe, or would you agree? Someone recently said that the final collaboration is with the reader.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, would you?
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that's where we want to get,
Right.
to the reader. And it's great that your roommate reads your poems and he or she likes them, but that's not your reader. You got to get out of that comfort zone, and do it not for your friends, but yeah, for your reader.
For the people that are out in the world that we don't know.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I love that idea of thinking that far ahead, and knowing that you're still not done once it's published. Like there's a lot more work
That's right.
that needs to be done with it.
Yeah.
And even if that's getting out there and meeting your audience.
Yeah.
And reading to your audience, which is equally important.
Well, and it's, for me, it's so beautiful. I mean, it feels like closure. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you arrive at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're not done, but it feels like yeah.
Do you feel? I've mentioned this before. I did a reading of my book during the pandemic. I just did an online Zoom thing, and you could get tickets to it, and it was. I just wanted to read my book, and my book is 20 years of pretty much autobiographical poetry. And as I was reading it, I was like, who is this person?
Wow.
Like I had changed or grown.
Great.
And so it felt weird reading it. Do you feel that way with your old stuff, or have you been able to maintain that throughout?
I still don't feel weird. Yes. Yeah. I for the Hafez reading, I chose to read a poem I wrote 15 years ago, which is when I started.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel pretty comfortable reading it. Maybe there are 2 poems on that book that I cannot read again.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Overall, I can still read those poems. But I love hearing this. I have a lot of friends who are just absolutely embarrassed of their first or second or
Or
third,
third,
whatever,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they
yeah.
just don't. They try to suppress it from their. It's all good. It's part of your growth. It's part
It
of your
is.
journey, and
I'm fine with it being out there. I
yes,
think when I read it out loud and I hear it again out loud, I'm like, oh, this is weird. It feels almost disjointed because it just doesn't feel like
yeah,
it's hard for me to connect with it or reconnect with it.
yeah, yeah,
So I'm fine with it being out there. You're right. It does express growth, and that's why I have a lot of my old podcasts still
yeah,
out there. The
yeah.
ones that I cringe about, and I'm like, oh, that sounds terrible or whatever. But like, you have to have it
But
out
it's
there.
me. Yeah,
It's
it's me too. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, and I think all artists probably encounter that.
yeah.
You
I
know,
think so.
I don't think we're alone in that.
And it's
So
okay if you don't. I mean, I think this is going back again with being sincere. If you don't feel like that poem you wrote 10 years ago doesn't
Mhm.
represent you anymore for some reason, don't read it.
Don't read it, right?
It's there in the book, but don't give it importance. Focus on the other ones that are still expressing who you
Who
are.
you are now.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Or still you can connect with and
yeah,
feel good
yeah.
about. Do you like getting back quickly to the collaboration stuff? Do you like working on your own, or do you like collaborating with others? Do you have a preference?
I love collaborating, and sometimes collaboration happens without you knowing about it. And going back to the question about have my writing changed after teaching literature or
Yeah.
writing, I was teaching this class that I'm teaching right now, postcolonial literature. I taught this class 2 years ago, and I wrote a poem after one of my classes. It was a heavy class, and I wrote this poem called Human in Progress. And I read it for Poetry on Point, which is
Mhm.
an activity that Katie Manning puts together
Yeah.
in Point Loma. I read that poem about my post-colonial class, and my students were there, and one of my students decided to write a response to my poem,
Oh,
Human in Progress.
yeah.
And she's a poet. She's a very precocious
Yeah.
student we have. She's published already 2 books of poetry. She's really good. So then she sent this poem to me, and we read it together in the class. So that was a collaboration.
Yeah, that
It's
is. Yeah.
trying,
Yeah.
it's about inspiring each other. So no, I love it because it's adding readers.
Yeah.
At the
Yeah.
end of the day, it's you reading other people and other people reading you.
What do you like about the writing solo process, or do you not like much about it at all?
I love it. I wish I had more time
Yeah.
to do it. I write in the mornings. That's when I'm the brightest.
Oh yeah.
I
Okay. So you're a
feel.
morning writer.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
I have no problem getting up at 5 or 6 in the morning because I have 2 little kids, and the house quickly becomes, we
Very
get
active and
busy.
loud.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love staring at a blank page. I know a lot of people feel intimidated by that, but for me, it's just an
Opportunity.
opportunity. Oh,
Yeah.
you can start over. It's playing God.
Yeah.
You're a little creator. You're a little God. There
Yeah.
you are.
World builder.
Yes, there's a lot of dishes that need to be done. There's a lot of exams that I have to grade. There's a lot of things I should be worried about. There are 2 wars happening right now, and my heart is heavy with everything, but I need to have that blank page in front of me and have the opportunity to try to make sense of what's going on outside and inside
Yeah.
me.
An empty canvas is really good for that.
Yeah.
It's almost meditative in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say there are times where sometimes that cursor blinks a little too much, and that stresses me
Mhm.
out when I can't express myself, even though I have that canvas.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was talking about this with a friend, poet in Puerto Rico, who's older. I appreciate my older friends so much because they've been through this. They've been stuck
Yeah.
longer. And I was just expressing my frustration. Like, I finally have the time. I finally sit down. I have my coffee. I have my flowers. I have everything that I feel I need to write, and it just doesn't happen. It doesn't come to me. I decide to open a book that I like, that inspires me to write, but it's just not. And she just like, it's okay. That's writing.
That's writing. Yeah.
It's hesitation, just station. Just wait, just welcome that. Try to
Mhm.
embrace that, and it's normal to feel frustrated. But how boring, how silly it would be if you just stare at the screen and then everything comes out, and like that. That
Sometimes
doesn't
that
happen.
happens, but
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
it doesn't.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
and
yeah.
when it doesn't, it's still part. Like you said, it's still writing.
Yeah.
You're not just sitting there going, just mindlessly looking around. You're
Yeah.
actually trying to process.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, do you do anything that's not creative to try to break that, I guess, inability to write? Like, for example, do you go for a walk, or do you clean your house, or
I guess cleaning is the thing I do.
yeah,
To feel that even though I'm not able to write right now, I can accomplish these other things that I have to anyway.
yeah,
And what I do is that I try to enjoy it and I
mm-hmm.
try to do it creatively because
Right,
I feel that if I'm creative also in those areas, some of that creativity might,
spill over.
spill over.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's hopefully.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Or but uh, also I try to switch. If I'm stuck and I can't get this poem out, I try to write a review of a book that I read and I wanted to do that. So I if it's time for writing, I write.
You'll find a different
Yes.
thing to
So
write.
if if this is not working out, let's move to another task.
And you find success with that?
I do.
Yeah.
I feel like writing, what's the word, begets?
Yeah.
Writing begets writing.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
even if you're switching to another form, style, it's sort of, you loosen up, you know what I mean? And
The juices are flowing.
yeah,
Yeah. I can appreciate that. I want to ask about publishing. And I don't want it to. I don't want this to seem like self-publishing is a bad idea, because it really isn't. But what can traditional publishing do for a writer's confidence?
Traditional publishing? Wow.
Or if it does anything at all, I guess.
Oh no,
yeah.
it does. It does a lot. I'll explain why. But I also want to notice that the new Nobel Prize for literature was published in only in an independent publishing house, right?
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
these things are. I feel that they're mattering less and less.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So, having said that, I published my first two books in Puerto Rico with independent publishing houses. They have an editorial board anyway, right? So it wasn't self-publishing. There's not a lot of. It's great. I like it. The first one is pretty much. It's a very small publishing house, La Secta de los Perros, but they have a great catalog. They just publish your book. They put their kind of stamp,
Mhm.
but it's on you, right? To move it, to sell it, to
Yeah,
promote it.
yeah.
That's all
Like
on.
a small press.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was lucky for the second book. It got the award for the Instituto de Cultura Puertorriqueña. It was the poetry award of that year, 2015. So that was different. That
Right.
was a whole institute taking care of my book, and the difference was felt.
Yeah.
But then the hurricane came, Maria came. It
Mhm.
devastated a lot of these institutions. The book came out of print. So then nothing happened. A new edition is coming out in a few months.
Okay.
now.
Well, that's good.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah. But with this one, with the University of Arizona Press, wow, that's just a huge difference. I had 7 people emailing me just for my book, like marketing, distribution,
Oh, really?
the artist, the editor.
Wow.
I've never felt so much support. And
Yeah.
it definitely does something to your self-esteem, because you have all of these people who read your book and have very specific, concrete, great advice for you. And you're getting that feedback from the person from the poet, but also from the person who's going to distribute the book, for the person who's doing the marketing, for the person who's doing the cover art. So it's just, it was overwhelming at times,
Right.
opening the email and being like, oh my goodness, I have to respond to all these people. I had several Zoom meetings with the team. So they just take it really seriously.
Mhm.
So
And
yeah.
they have your back almost.
They
it's
do.
Like they're
Absolutely.
just all in with you.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, whatever I want. Yeah.
Yeah.
I chose the art for the cover. I chose the artist. Yeah, no, it's great.
Are there things that can, maybe this is the wrong way to put it, but are there things about that publishing process that can sort of ruin the experience?
Not in this case. It didn't. But I think you have to be in the right mood.
Yeah.
It could in a different
It
stage
could
of
go
my
a totally
life.
different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I was just in the right place, and it's it's an award, so I got money for it also.
Mhm,
So it
mhm.
also feels like
validation in
yeah,
a way.
I've already got something,
Yeah.
so yeah, no, it didn't take anything. It added magic and it helped me. I had to fill this questionnaire, this author questionnaire, and I feel like I should share this with all the
Everybody now.
writers I
Yeah.
know. They gave it to you, and it's incredible. It's amazing, and it's just to sell the book better. But you have to do a summary this way. You have to then do another kind of summary.
I would
And
like
yeah,
a copy of that.
yeah,
please.
no, I'll give it to you. And
Yeah.
it's tedious. The process is tedious. But at the end of the day, you have this amazing document and your book explained in 5 different ways
Yeah.
for different audiences. For example, that's just
Oh
so,
yeah,
yeah.
the audience part. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that sounds great. That's something that I'm working on a novel now, and that's something that I want to experience.
Yeah.
It was great publishing with Puna Press,
Mm-hmm.
and Ted Washington and doing all that, and I felt cared for
The love,
during that
yeah,
process.
absolutely.
But I also would like to experience having
The power.
yes.
You had the love. You want the power.
Exactly. Yeah. I want the wind behind me,
Yes.
helping me.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that Ted
Yes.
didn't do that or anything. He still does it. He
Yeah.
does it for everybody.
Yeah.
But there's something to have those emails. I
Yeah.
got my emails from Ted and my editor, Kara
Yeah,
Goldfarb,
yeah,
and those
yeah.
were great.
Yeah.
But we didn't do the marketing.
Yeah.
We didn't have all all that.
No,
sort of
it's
stuff.
amazing because those people are also talking among
Mhm.
each other,
Yeah, yeah.
so it's just great. And also in this case, I was also talking constantly with the translator Alejandra, so it felt real, and we divided the tasks,
Mhm.
so the author questionnaire we did half and half.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I never felt alone. We were just all together working together. So no, it was great, and a learning experience that I'm going to carry
Into the
now,
next ones.
whatever I publish,
Yeah.
independent or not. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, and that's good to have that in your back pocket too.
Yeah.
But I'll be hitting you up for that document.
Oh
I
yeah,
gotta figure that out.
absolutely.
Would you consider yourself more of a page poet than a performance poet, or do you even think in those terms?
Well, now I am. Now that you ask the
Yeah.
question, page poet,
Page, yeah, okay.
absolutely. I haven't read enough. That's the truth. So I haven't been able to actually kind of develop
a
that side.
performance
If it's
voice.
there,
Mhm.
I don't know if it's there.
And it doesn't have to be.
No, as a reader, that's the thing. I don't know if you can make the same, apply the same concept, but I am a page reader more than a performance
Listener.
listener.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So
Why is that, do you think?
I think I love reading poetry in my voice,
Yeah.
in my own terms.
Okay.
Sometimes I've read books of poetry that I love, and then I went to the event, and it's great to meet the author. But I think it's a big difference. The way, the personality, right? The voice they add to that poem. It's
Yeah.
almost a separate thing. Sometimes you find a great harmony between the poem you read in the page and the way it's read, and the poet,
Mhm.
him or herself. But yeah, it's just, yeah, I just, I'm happier reading
Reading
a
it.
poem. I love hearing poetry, of course. It's just, yeah, I'd rather read it first, at least.
Yeah, that way I think that probably helps you get your own sense of what it is, and then when the poet themselves or the writer themselves, they come in and read it, and you hear how they intend it, you're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, I see.
Right, yeah.
Maybe I hit it on the mark with
Yeah.
my own interpretation of
Yeah.
it.
There's also poetry that it was written to be read out loud,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's not my process.
That's what I was getting. Yeah, because I
Yeah.
write for both. I have
Oh,
some
I
that's
see.
page and some that's for performance.
cool, cool.
So I was curious what other writers do that.
Oh yeah, no, that's interesting. But this is cool too, because when I'm asked to read a poem, and I know I'm going to read a poem, of course, when I'm choosing, I tend to choose the one I think it's gonna sound better. So
Right,
I
right.
didn't write it thinking that. But yeah, there's some poems that are definitely better
Better.
to read out loud.
Yeah.
And I there was a category for another grant I applied 2 years ago, the Letras Boricuas one, and they had like 10 grants for 10 positions for poets writing, and then they had an outspoken, for spoken.
performance.
Yeah. And when we got together, the winners of that, and we were listening to each other's, and of course, the person who stole the show that night was the
performance
yeah,
poet. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
great.
They usually
And
do.
Yeah,
They
no, it
usually
was
do.
fantastic. Even the way he went, he dressed up. He brought prompts, and it was just incredible. Like none of the other poets thought about about doing anything like that. We were just there holding our books and reading a poem.
Seasoned vet right there.
Yeah. So it was great.
When you read books of people that you know personally,
Hmm.
are you reading it in their voice in your head, or do you have your own voice reading it?
I have my own voice.
Okay.
That's good. I mean, I know them,
Mm-hmm.
and if I know them really well, I can even know what happened,
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
happening
yeah,
in this
yeah.
poem. I know their limits also. I talk about that with them, no
Mhm.
problem with,
Sure.
with many of them.
Yeah.
I love posting poems on Facebook and Instagram and other social media because almost always I get immediate feedback. People, even in comments or private message, and
Right,
I love
right.
it because it's some people I guess would find this annoying and would be mad. It's mostly men also. It's funny. They correct me something or they say, what about this word instead of this word? What about and I I love the fact that they care so much that they'll
Sure.
bother to tell me what they're thinking. So, I- I'm used to share my poetry and get feedback immediately, and I appreciate it. And I like doing the same, but definitely it's a different experience when you're reading friends'
It is.
poetry than
Yeah.
when you're reading, Neruda's poems. Yeah.
Because when I read poetry or read a book that's a friend that I know well, not or well enough, I can hear I can bring their voice to mind. I read it in their voice,
Hmm.
and it almost helps me connect with it
Yeah.
more. Just because I know who wrote this,
Hmm.
I can hear their voice. And another thing I've mentioned before is Leslie Ferguson. She's a memoirist, and
Uh-huh.
she wrote a book when I was her daughter. And when I read that book, I can read it in her voice,
Huh.
and it just sinks in that much more.
Wow.
So I'm curious how other people hear things in their own heads.
Well, for me, it's like I have to make it my own
Okay.
almost.
Okay, that makes
You
sense.
know,
Yeah.
I have to kind of separate it from the person to understand the poem in their universality and not be biased, even.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's important for me to do that. Not that I'm always successful doing that because you know the person, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So I do have a question. We brought up earlier, talking about the 50 writers in Puerto Rico that you grew up, everybody grows up knowing. But I'm curious, as you've been here in the U.S., and this might be a weird way of asking, but do you think there is a good cultural representation of writing, international cultural representation of writing and poets in the U.S., or do you think we're a little stuck on the U.S. poets?
well, I don't think so. I mean, the U.S. is a incredibly diverse
Yeah.
place, and I think at least if you are interested, if you want to read Latino
If
writers,
you have
or
access to it.
you do in
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
country more than in many other
Yeah.
countries,
Okay. That's a good
definitely,
point.
because
Yeah.
because the Hispanic community in the U.S. is it's growing, it hasn't stopped growing, and it is powerful
Mm-hmm.
in certain areas. Yeah, of course, and also who can deny that there is a whole. We are in this stage now that we're trying to be more fair, inclusive,
Mm-hmm.
right? We are
Mm-hmm.
trying to promote diversity. So yeah, no, I feel that I noticed a big change. I came to this country in 2006. I feel that since like 2012, I've seen a lot more of in the mainstream media,
Mainstream,
right?
yes.
About Latino literature, definitely. And I think there's a good representation. I'm sorry that it's still difficult to get key authors translated into English. That's been really slow. I was trying to find a collection of poems by the Chilean Nobel Prize, Gabriela Mistral. And there's just like one option right now in Amazon, and
Yeah.
like 2 copies left. It's just strange how hasn't grown much. But new authors, born and raised in the U.S., yes, I think they have a good platform. Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
But we need to improve so we can offer more of that literature to the U.S. audience.
Well, the younger kids, the younger generations too.
Yeah.
I think I feel like the younger generation is is expressing and experiencing more poetry than they did when I was younger. Like when I was writing, but I didn't have a lot of friends writing poetry.
Yeah.
You
Why
know.
is that? I think people are a little. It's shorter.
Mm-hmm.
You think? I mean, I don't know if I can say the same about literature, about novels.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
I don't think there's more people reading novels, but I have the impression more people read
Poetry,
poetry.
yeah,
Yeah,
more
and
than they
write.
used to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I've always, and I could be very wrong on this, and I fully admit it, but I've always thought it was simply because not simply, but it was partly because it's not taught well in schools
Mm.
as for the younger kids.
Mm-hmm.
And there's focused on the science, the STEM, the
Yeah,
science, tech, and all
yeah,
that stuff, and
yeah.
that's fine and that's good. We have to have that, but when we teach art, do we include poetry as
Right.
well? And I'm
Right.
not sure. I think that's getting better, but it wasn't like that when I was a
Yeah,
kid.
and also how we are teaching it,
How we were teaching it
because
and
you
who
can
we're teaching.
take a beautiful class of poetry and turn it in, just make it about the metric and counting, and
Yeah,
that
yeah.
doesn't turn people on at
No,
all.
no,
So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, it's how. Yeah, for sure.
And
So
you couldn't do that with a novel. You can't do the metric, so you would have to actually get into it. So get
hmm
into the poem. Forget about all that.
yeah,
Yeah,
for sure, for sure. I would like to see. I'm very curious in 20 years where
yeah,
poetry will be,
yeah.
because I think it feels significantly different than it did 20 years ago.
Absolutely, and of course, technology had a lot to do
Oh,
with
that's a
that,
very good
and the
point.
way
Yeah.
we share what we write, the things we're allowed to share in these spaces, which is brief. I
Mm-hmm.
think, yeah. Although, I mean, novel writers of novels are still selling more and making more money.
Of
That
course.
will
Yeah.
always be like that. But yeah, there's definitely a new age for poetry.
There is, and I've also seen a lot of novelists are poets as well, but
Yeah.
they sell their novel, and then they're like, oh, by the way, I have a book of
Whoosh.
poetry.
So
You
so
know,
that's how they make their living as novelists.
as
But
not
the real passion
the real
is
passion might be
poetry.
poetry. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Although there were some that were much better novelists than they were
Ah.
poets, but still they've got that stuff
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Are there any myths about poetry that you would like to dispel?
Yeah. It's not always about yourself. I feel poets are often call out, like, whoa, what's that poem about? Did that happen to you? You don't
Yeah.
ask that to a novelist. You're not constantly asking, like, that happened to you. No, we understand it's a work of fiction. And I want people to understand that poets also write a lot of poems just out of, it's a work of fiction
Mm-hmm,
also.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Even though it's self-expression.
it's self-expression, but it's just, I'm walking down the street and I'm listening to an incredible conversation, and I decide to write a poem about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not me
It's
who
their
was left in
conversation,
the
yeah.
altar. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah.
not me, but I
Yeah,
still
yeah.
want to get across that poem, and I might do it in the first person. So
So you don't feel like the writer would. This is a bad question, possibly, but you don't feel like it's important for the writer to express that was a conversation you heard elsewhere.
well, you can. That's the moment when you're writing an event, and someone asks a question. How
Yeah.
did you come up with this poem? But sometimes I just feel like almost nervous, like I finish a book and I'm like, gee, I don't want people to think this is all
This is
about
me.
yeah, because it really, it's not. It is in a sense,
Yeah,
right? It
yeah.
always is. But yeah, don't take everything like it's so personal, because
It's always not. It's
'cause
usually sometimes it's not.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We are creators,
Right.
and we should be respected like that.
Yeah.
It's not just we're so desperate, or we're so overcome with emotions that now we have to write a poem. No, that's not it. That's a little bit of romanticizing the whole
Mhm.
work of a poet. It's hard work. We want to create something that is original, that it's new, that it defies conventions.
Yeah.
It's something new,
Yeah.
that makes you think. It's not an excess of emotions or feelings. I'm being rational, and this is an important work.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you're bringing this up. I was talking with someone recently about a manuscript I submitted that isn't quite right for what they're trying to do, simply because of how I want it formatted, and I won't adjust to that, and that's just my personal thing. But some of the feedback I got back was that the poem was very much Adam Greenfield. And I understand that, but it makes me look at the poems and go, well, do I need to write a book that isn't about me?
Wow. Yeah.
You know, like, what do I do? You know, like I've been writing poetry since I was, 12, and it's been about how I feel,
Yeah.
you know,
Absolutely.
but and when I try to write a poem that isn't about me, it's such a struggle, and it's very hard to get out something that is Kazim Ali, something that is, or the poets we heard about Hafez at Hafez
Yeah.
Day,
Yeah.
like to me, it's so difficult to write
Yeah.
about something that is so powerful that I'm not involved in.
That is not happening to you
Yeah,
directly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I appreciated the feedback, but I'm like, well, now I'm looking at all my
Yeah.
poetry and going, oh shit, it is all
Yeah.
about me.
I think we all experience that, and sometimes it's a real challenge. And this happens when I'm staring at that blank page and I'm thinking, and I have thoughts I want to write down, but I'm thinking, I don't want it to be about that thing that happened to me. Honestly, like I'm thinking that.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be about me like that. I want to detach myself from that experience and somehow make it like it's not mine anymore. How can I do that?
Look at it from outside.
Yes. And
Yeah,
I just, sometimes I'm like, okay, so since I cannot write about that right now, what about I write about that tree that I'm staring at right now? And somehow the ideas that I'm trying to repress come across in my poem that's really about the tree. And that's a compromise that I'm making there.
That's a good compromise.
Yeah. It's not about hiding. I just really want to objectify the feeling. That's
separate
moving
you
me.
from the feeling.
Yes.
So you can analyze the feeling and not yourself.
Yeah, for me, that's always important. Again, going back to make it a little universal, because I feel that as a writer, I want to reach as many readers I can. Right. And I have been reached by that sort of poet who is trying to detach from their own feelings. And you can tell, like you read these poems from classics and it's like, this is a struggle.
I can connect to this.
Yes, but it's going way beyond. It's transcending their humanity, their individuality. So yeah,
that's. I hope to get my poetry to that point. I know sometimes when I'll see people read it. I'm selling the book somewhere, and they'll pick it up and they'll flip through it and they'll start nodding along, and I'm like, okay, I can see that there's somewhat of a connection there. But then I read it myself, and I'm like, oh my God, I remember when I wrote this. I remember what it's about. Like, like all those things, and I'm like. Now, I think that's partly why I was backing away from poetry and getting back to fiction, is because now I can write about somebody else.
Yeah.
But maybe I'll start practicing writing poetry that isn't about me.
Right, and it's gonna be about you, but you don't only you know.
Right.
Yeah, and you can do it.
I'll work on that.
It's fine.
I'll work on that. All right, last question. And I usually ask this question of everybody, so I'm very curious of what your answer will be. If there was one poem or song or anything creative that you wish you wrote, what would it be?
Wow, actually, there is a poem of a poet I like very much. Her name is Mara Pastor. She is a Puerto Rican poet. Wow, and she has a beautiful book called Natal Debt, Deuda Natal, and it won the Ambroyo Award 3 years ago.
Oh, did? Okay.
Yeah. And she is basing her poem on another poet, Amy Cesar, Caribbean poet also. And I'm failing to remember the title of this poem, but I remember I had Mara coming to Point Loma, over Zoom. It was during the pandemic, and I asked her to read this poem in particular. And I remember she read it in Spanish, and then I read it in English. And when I finished reading it, I said, I feel like I wrote this poem. It was that feeling. I'm so sorry I can't tell you the title, but I am gonna take this opportunity to recommend this book, Natal Debt, from my Puerto Rican poet Mara Pastor, and it's a very affirming poem about the things the poet thinks she will have in the future. I will have this. I will have a house. I will have a daughter. She calls, I will have an island. The name of her daughter, it's Island. So it's very it's very full of meaning for her and for me, knowing her. So I would say
you
that.
Wish you wrote that one.
So just a friend of mine actually.
That's good. That's a good one. I like that answer. I alwaess hear about new things whenever I ask this question. And
cool.
I love it. Like,
nobody chooses a classic.
Well, that's not necessarily true. I mean, there are things that, like, someone said that she wished she wrote Hey Jude by the Beatles.
Oh, that's cool.
Like
Yeah.
I had somebody who said that he wished he wrote the Bible so everybody would have a voice.
Wow.
Like
Yeah.
all these really like interesting
Yeah. Well,
answers.
I wish I wrote like 5 songs of Bob Dylan.
Bob did that'd be nice, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
There's plenty that I wish I did
Yes,
that. So
definitely.
I can
Yeah.
understand that. Well,
I'm happy he got the Nobel Prize at some point.
it was interesting where he didn't want to accept it for a
No,
little while.
and it was very polemic because a lot of people were angry
Yeah,
because a
yeah.
musician
Yeah.
got the Nobel Prize.
You
Yeah.
can't please everybody.
No, no, no.
But
no.
I think he deserves some sort of
Absolutely.
award for some of
Yeah.
the stuff that he did. I mean, just
Yeah.
even from the early stuff that he did, that song Hurricane. You know that one?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's just amazing.
it's powerful
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
So he's a good storyteller.
Yeah.
But
Edifying,
Yeah.
I heard his songs and I feel edified, even if they're sad and
Yeah.
yeah.
I saw him live years ago,
Yeah.
and I didn't understand a word he said.
No, I love that. I
But
saw him twice
Yeah,
because he's such a creator. He doesn't like it. He doesn't like people singing along with him.
right.
And I
right.
love that. He's like, shut up and listen, because the artist is me. So he destroys his songs and makes them new again in the
Oh, that's
concert.
fine.
You
Yeah,
know, like
yeah.
you can't. You only know what he's singing halfway through the song, and
Right.
that's when you identify
You're
the
like, oh, I
song.
remember this. Yeah,
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
fine.
yeah.
That's fine. Well, Margarita, again, I thank you for making your way here and doing this, and I just appreciate your time.
Thank you. It was great.